See, in some of the interviews, this kind of question will be asked. Okay. Yes, I have faced this question in some of the interviews. Yes, so I'm telling you this. In general, if you go for any Spring application, okay. In general, if you go for any Spring application, how we create the objects in Spring? How we can create object through Spring? Using? Just tell the thing exactly. How we can create an object in Spring? We are not creating objects through dependency injection. Okay? Through dependency injection, we are linking the objects. Okay? How the objects are being created in Spring? What is the code that we write to create the objects in Spring? That's what I am asking. How we can create the objects in Spring means by making use of either bin factory or application context. What do you have practiced? Told that you are practicing Spring from morning to evening, but you could not be able to tell how we can create an object using Spring. There are two ways of creating objects in Spring. One way is making use of bin factory. Second is making use of application context. Okay. First we load the XML file using application context. Then using that application context object, okay, we execute the getBin method, which will create the objects, which will load the objects. Okay. So how we can load the objects into a Spring application means, okay, through application context. Okay. Now, are we writing any application context related code in the controllers? Okay. Now, can you tell the controller object is not created? Can you tell that the controller object is not created? Object to controller class will be created or not? While performing Spring MVC, object to controller class will be created or not? Yes or no? Yes, how you can tell that object to controller class is created? Okay, since these are non-static methods, without object creation we cannot access these methods. Okay, so we should have an object of controller. Now, are we creating the object of controller here? We are not creating the object of controller. Okay, Spring framework itself internally makes use of this web application context. This web application context is a sub-interface to application context. Okay, this is a sub-interface to application context. Okay, Spring internally makes use of this web application context. Web application context to create the objects. Okay, And while loading the context, do you know what is context? Do you know what is context? All of you know what is context? You forgot everything? Forgot config, context, everything? Context is an object which represents a web application. Okay? For a web application, context will be only one. Okay? So, there will be a listener named context loader listener. Okay? This context loader listener, okay? The definition it is a listener which is executed while loading the context. Okay? It is a listener which is loaded while loading the context. This is a listener, okay, which is executed while loading the context. It's a listener which is executed while loading the context. Okay? Whenever the context is loaded, the Spring framework automatically executes this context loader listener. The Spring framework automatically executes this context loader listener. And in the context loader listener, there will be a code to create the object to controller classes. There will be code to create object to controller classes. And code to create object to controller classes. And internally, context loader listener makes use of web application context. Web application context to create the objects. Understood? How the objects are being created in Spring? Spring MVC. If you use Spring MVC, we need not to create the objects. We need not to create application context, or we need not to execute the getBean method. All these things will be done by Spring itself. Spring will make a call to a listener which is named as context loader listener whenever the context is loaded. Okay? That context loader listener has a code to create the objects, to controller services, DOs, whatever it might be. To create the objects. Okay? Internally to make use of web application context. Understood? How the objects are created in Spring MVC. But in other parts of Spring, we should go for application context, getBean method. But in Spring MVC, objects can be created by making use of context loader, and it internally make use of web application context. Understood? That's why I used to ask you practice, learn more number of times. Don't try to practice for a single time and think that you are a master of Spring or you are a master of Java. Practice is repeatedly. Okay, discuss the concepts with your friends, with somebody else. That's a perfect way of learning. Okay, learning it individually will never give you anything. Learn the things, practice the things, discuss the things with anybody. This is what. Okay? That's how the subject will improve. Don't think that just by practicing once or twice you can get everything. It's not the way. Okay. Now let me create a new project for AOP. Now the next module in Spring that we are going to discuss is AOP. AOP stands for Aspect Oriented Programming. Okay? Aspect Oriented Programming. Okay. In general, in any software applications, Chuck is there. In software applications, we have concerns. Concerns are the items that we develop in the software application. The parts or the pieces or the slices of a software application. Okay? The pieces of the pieces or the parts or pieces or slices or items in software application. In general, they can be referred as the concerns majorly are divided into function control and cross-cutting concerns. Function control and cross-cutting concerns. Function concerns means the items that we develop to implement the functionality. Like there is a line we login. Okay, after login, we make a account or we can transfer the amount. Okay, these are the functionalities which we have to make the functional. Apart from the function concerns. Okay, understand what is functional concern? Understand what is the first? Also understand what is the concern is? Concern is an item or a part that we call the software. Okay. Basically, we have two types of concerns. One is functional concerns and cross-cutting concerns. Okay. Functional concerns will be straightforward. Okay. This concern which is used to develop a specific functionality in the application. In the application, you may have multiple hundreds of functionalities. Okay, functional concerns represent the functionalities in the application. It's a straightforward. Okay, you may have hundreds of functionalities. There is still a functional concern represents okay, and this cross-cutting concern. Okay, never represent the functionality. Okay. These are the concerns, these are the non-functional concerns, okay, which are used to know the application. Okay, cross-cutting, that's why it is known as cross-cutting concern. These concerns are used across the application. So, these are the cross-cutting concerns. Just because these are not used in a specific part of the application, these are used across the application.
So, close application. So, this is called as cross-cutting concerns. And these cross-cutting concerns are not specific meaning functions. They are generic. They are common for all the functions in the application. Function is not C function is also function. Function here is the functionality. Functionality of the application. Okay. These cross-cutting concerns are not used in a single functionality of the application. It's used throughout the functionality. Okay. Throughout the application here we use cross-cutting concerns. Some of the examples for cross-cutting concerns are logging, audit logging. Okay. This is how audit logging will be made. Okay. Just for the like writing. Okay. Writing has to maintain an audit. Leverage is logging inside. But when we set up for example user, whatever the user is writing, okay, any application will maintain a log. Okay, this is a log file. Right? Let's say I have writing logging. Okay, so values are logging. Okay, and values are logging as direct possible. Now, the right values are successfully logging. Okay, and values are applied to make submission. Okay. Now, is it specific model or is this logging or logging common to all the models? Is this audit logging common to all the models or is it specific to specific model? Just think. Is it common to all the models or is it specific to a specific model? Audit logging can be made, it should be maintained for any model. Okay, just consider a banking application, I have funds transfer, I have account adding, I have contract adding. For any model, I should maintain the logging, audit logging. So that in the future, okay, if some banking person wants to hack your account, just consider Xpay asks for bank account. So the bank will maintain audit log. So the bank will track the audit log as well as the account number and it will give you this was the first account this time. And this time translating as a remote. And this time he has added a new contract. And this time he has made some funds. And this time he has added some new account. This kind of audit log should be maintained for any model. So, this audit logging is a cross-cutting function. It's not a functional function. It's not specific to functionality. It's not specific model. It is generic to all the models. Okay? Previously, before AOC, all these cross-cutting functions were combined with the application. That means, inside the application itself, okay, the cross-cutting functions are there. But what happens? If we are using something throughout the application, let's consider the application has 10 modules like this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like this and 10 modules, and all the 10 modules are using audit logging. Okay? Why do I write the audit logging for all the modules? Okay? So, the idea came like this. Okay? Right now, the cross-cutting functions is not that. To write the cross-cutting functions separately, okay, and just automatically remove the cross-cutting functions from all of them. Okay? Understand what cross-cutting functions are and why we should separate the cross-cutting functions? Understand everybody? Why we should separate the cross-cutting functions from the basic function concerns? The cross-cutting functions will be used in all the functionalities, in all the models, in all the functional functions. So, rather than developing the cross-cutting functions inside the functional functions, inside the functionalities, inside the model, We keep the cross-cutting concerns as a separate element, a separate entity, okay? And we make this cross-cutting concern to be invoked, okay? Parallelly with the main model. Let's select if M1 represents, okay, adding an account. So while adding an account, automatically logging will be executed. Okay, so that while adding an account, automatically logging information will be logged to the log file. So person has logged in so that and he has added an account with name with brand something. So whenever in the future, if anybody wants to track your account, it will become very easy. What you have to do? If whatever you are doing, even if you have a single click on application, it will be tracked in the log files. So history is more important. You claim that I have never transferred 10,000 to that account. But how the bank will prove that you have transferred 10,000? You need storage logging. Okay? Logging is important for any application. Okay? Not even to track it. Just like if there is any error in the production, how we can track it using this log files. Okay? In which process error is occurred? Why the error is occurred? Is the error occurred because of invalid data or the error occurred because of incorrect logic? If it is of invalid data, then validation code is not correct. Okay, we need to refine the validation. Okay, we is correct data, but the results are not correctly coming. The business logic that we have is incorrect. So, you have to debug the application in the production as well as you have to maintain the history. Audit logging is very important. Audit logging is one of the cross-cutting concerns. Okay, likewise we have several cross-cutting concerns like caching, exception caching, transaction management, sometimes validation. All these are cross-cutting concerns. Okay, just you know about caching. You know about caching? Do not listen to several classes. Just temporarily storing the object information in a secondary memory. Okay? Temporarily storing the object information in secondary memory. So that rather than loading the objects every time, rather than creating objects every time, we reuse the existing objects in the cache. Okay? For many modules, caching might be required. Rather than keeping caching all the modules, just what we do is we perform the caching element from separate cross-cutting. Okay? And exception handling. Rather than handling the exception everywhere in the application, okay? We handle the exception as a generic cross-cutting. Okay? And transaction management. Okay, we'll discuss about this transaction management validation. Rather than implementing validations in every module, we implement the module validations separately. This is also a cross-cutting. These are some examples of the cross-cutting concerns. Okay, rather than including these cross-cutting concerns in the base application, we separate this cross-cutting concern, okay, from the function concern, and we make these cross-cutting concerns to be executed when something happens in the function. Understood? We separate the function concerns and we separate the cross-cutting concerns. And we make these cross-cutting concerns to be executed whenever something happens in the function. Some related thing happens in the function. Okay? Understood? One of the best ways of achieving this cross-cutting concerns is AOC. Okay? Aspect-oriented programming. One of the best ways to achieve this cross-cutting concerns, okay, is aspect-oriented programming. Okay? All of you Did you get what is a cross-cutting concern? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes? Can you explain what is a cross-cutting concern? What is a cross-cutting concern? Do you feel the same expression to the interviewer? First, what is the concern? Nothing. What is the question concern? Welcome to the function. What is the cross-cutting concern? I'm not asking where we are using this cross-cutting concern. I'm asking what is the cross-cutting. Cross-cutting concerns are concerns which are not related to the functionality but used throughout the functional concern. Okay, used in all the functional concerns, okay, but which are not related to the functionality. What is cross-cutting concern? Now let's look at knowledge learning. You know what is knowledge learning? You understand what is knowledge learning? Whenever the user makes any action in any of the application, it will be logged in the file. Okay? Any action, from logging to log out, any action will be logged in the file. So on so time, so on so synapse and logged to so on. He has clicked on control, he has clicked on add account, he has clicked on log out. Anything will be maintained in the account. Everything will be maintained in the account. So that in the future will be very easy to track that. Okay? So, solid learning is not specific function. It's not specific to functionality. Okay? So, the solid learning can be considered as cross-cutting concern, which can be used across the application. Which is used across the application. It's not specific to a function. Okay? The concerns which are not specific to a function and which are used through the application as well as cross-cutting concern. Audit learning is one of the best cross-cutting concern. It's not the only cross-cutting concern, we have several things like matching, exception handling, transaction management, validation. These are all cross-cutting concern. One of the best ways to implement cross-cutting concern is aspect-oriented. Okay? In this aspect of the programming, first we will learn what is the aspect. What is aspect? Okay. Aspect is the approach to achieve the cross-cutting principle. Aspect is the approach to achieve the cross-cutting principle. The approach that we take to achieve the cross-cutting principle is called as aspect. The aspect is a very much logical terminology. Aspect is a logical terminology. It's not the actual thing that exists in the application. It's just a logical terminology. See, we take class object. Class is a logical thing. Object is a physical thing. The same way, aspect is just a logical thing. It exists there. It doesn't exist anywhere in the application. Okay? We have another thing, another terminology, advice. What is advice mean? Advice is the actual code that represents. Advice is the actual code that represents the aspect. Advice is the actual code that represents the aspect. Just aspect is a very much logical idea, that's the thing. But the code exists in the application. Aspect doesn't exist in the application. Aspect is telling that, yeah, this is the way to achieve. Some class. This is the way to achieve. Okay? Some logic. And this is the way to achieve something. But that is a logical way. But the actual code that exists in the application is the aspect. Okay? That's it. What is the aspect and what is the way? This aspect is one of the logical way. Okay? It's a logical approach. Okay? To achieve the cross-cutting principle. But the actual code of achieving the cross-cutting principle, okay, will be there as an advice. Okay? That's it. And the next thing, advice is the code related to the cross-cutting principle. Okay, advice is the advice as the code related to the cross-cutting principle. Okay, that's what the language. Advice may have the code of knowledge learning. Advice may have the code for caching. Advice may have the code for exception handling. Advice may have the code for transaction management. Or advice may have the code for management. Okay, advice has the code to achieve one of the cross-cutting. Target. Target is the object on which the aspect or the advice is applied. Target is the object where or on which the advice or the aspect is applied. Advice is very much co-relating aspect is logical thing. Okay? And this target is the object where the aspect or the advice is applied. Let's look at like I have a class and customer service. Okay. Now I want to apply the AOP or the personal service object. I want to just select. I want to apply audit plugin for personal service object. So what is the target now? What is the target? I want to apply audit plugin to personal service class. Now, what is the target object? Personal service object is the target object. Okay, and the advice will be written in a advice, the advice tag or the advice object. Okay, the advice related code will be written in a special class. Okay, which has the code to perform this audit logging. And this audit logging will be applied to special class. Audit logging will be somewhere else, and this will be somewhere else, and this can be connected through AOC. Okay, this advice will be somewhere else, and the target will be somewhere else, and these two will be connected through string AOC. Okay, when something happens in the target, then this advice will be automatically executed. How we can make that will be learned, but how? What is the target? First we need to learn what is the advice, what is there in the advice. Okay, the cross-cutting variable code is there in the advice. Okay, and cross-cutting concern variable code is there in the advice. Try to achieve what is learning or any of the cross-cutting. Okay, and the target is the object. Okay, on which this cross-cutting concern, or on which this advices are, or on which these aspects are applied. Okay, target is the object on which the cross-cutting concerns, or on which this advices, or on which these aspects are applied. Okay, target is the object on which the aspects are applied. Now, in the target, okay, there will be multiple joint points. Joint points. Joint points are the places where an advice can be applied, or an aspect can be applied. Joint points are the possible places where an aspect can be applied. Joint points are the possible places in the target where the aspect can be applied. I will be using aspect and advice interchangeably. Okay? This aspect is a logical form and advice is the actual score. We can use aspect or advice. Okay? Well defined. Okay? Just in a personal service, we may have 10 methods. In that 10 methods, okay, we have starting of the method, ending of the method. Okay? We have try, catch, finally, let's say we have a personal service, we may have add person. In that add person, okay, this is the starting of the method, this is the ending of the method, and the method we may have exception. Right? Catch, and finally. Okay? This is the target object, and in this target object there is a method. In this method we may apply the aspect, or we may apply the advice at the beginning of the method, or ending of the method, or the try, or the catch, or finally. These are multiple joint points. These are multiple joint points in the target. Joint points are the places where the aspect or the advice can be applied. Okay? And when there are multiple joint points, we may not apply the aspect in all the joint points. Okay? We may or we may not apply the aspect in all the joint points. Let's consider if we want to apply the aspect only at the starting of the method. Then it is a point factor. The exact point where we are going to apply the exact joint point where we are going to apply the aspect is known as point. Okay? There might be multiple joint points where we can apply the aspect. Where we can apply the aspect. But the exact point where we are going to apply the aspect is for that point. Understood? In this method, there might be 10 joint points. But we may not apply the aspect in all the 10 joint points. Okay? The exact points where we are applying the aspect is called as point. Point diagonal. Understood? Everybody? This terminology will be a little bit confusing. But yeah, then you can get it later. Okay? Joint point means where the places in the target where this aspect can be applied. Where the outcome can be applied. Where execution has been applied. Now, I have 5 joint points here. I have 5 joint points here. Okay? Now, let's consider like if I am taking aspect exception handling. We take aspect exception handling. Okay? Now, can I apply 5 joint points? Can I apply the exception handling as 5 joint points? No. Exception handling can be applied only at the 3 joint points. So, these are the 3 point principle exception handling. Okay? The exact place where we are going to apply the aspect is for the point. Okay? And the next one is proxy. Proxy is an object which connects the target to the device. Just as a like, we have customers something like person service. From the person service, we are calling person PO. Right? We are executing PO dot save person. We are executing PO dot save person. Okay? Now, while executing the save person method, what we need to do is, okay, we need to tell that this from this service method we are making a call to save person. Okay, we need to maintain the value. Okay, so what we do is we maintain a proxy. Maintain a proxy outside. Okay, which first diverts the call to the advice. And then from the advice to the actual. Okay, now the target is person service. When I am making a call from person service to the person PO, okay, then what I am doing is I am establishing a proxy. The proxy, what it will do, it is an object, it is a AOC, Spring AOC object. Proxy is a Spring AOC object, okay, which diverts the call to the address. Which diverts the call to the address. It hijacks the call and it diverts the call to the address. And once the advice is completed, then it will proceed to the actual. We are not applying the proxy for DO. We are applying the proxy for a method call in the service. From the service itself, we are calling the DO, right? So, we are not proxying the DO. We are applying the proxy for the method call in the service. What the proxy will do is, rather than directly going to the DO, the proxy first will divert the call to the advice, and the proxy itself, once advice is completed, the proxy itself will divert the call to the DO. So automatically, just select this advice is used to implement the logging. Now, when the same person is there is executed, is the logging applied? Yes, select if same method is same person is executed. We are checking the person. Now, is the logging implemented? Yes. Is the logging implemented when saving the person? Yes. Let's select this advice is used to this advice is used to implement some logging. Audit logging. Now, is audit logging implemented while saving the person? Yes or no? Yes. Now, is the code of audit logging and same person is in the same class, or is it modular? Is it separated? Separated. And this string AOC proxy object through subsequent configuration, divert first the call to the advice. This is aspect related programming. Okay? What the regular object-oriented programming happens? It will happen procedurally. First line, second line, third line, fourth line. But interrupting the call, hijacking the call, and diverting the call to some other object. Okay? Some other advice object. And once advice is completed, again diverting the call to another object. This is the base in what aspect programming. Okay? This is the base for aspect programming. And this is the proxy. Okay? This is the target object. Okay, this is another object. Okay, let's select we have a same of the user. In the DO. And this UMS is being called from service. We have proxy service. And so, just the proxy will act as a layer. Okay, the proxy object first divert the call to the advice. Otherwise, again the specific method will be. This is a very basic thing for AOC. But how the object-oriented programming happens? It happens in a pretty much linear fashion. First line, second line, third line, fourth line, fifth line. But it's little bit different from object-oriented programming. Just because whenever some method is executed, okay? At some point or at some point, we navigate or we define the call of the your aspect, and then from that we make it. So it's little bit different from aspect-oriented programming. Sorry, object-oriented programming. Object-oriented programming has first line, second line, third line, fourth line. Like in linear fashion. But how we AOP is okay? Let's select is non-manual flowing. Okay, at some point, automatically the string AOC proxy will deviate the call to the aspect. Again, from the aspect, it will make it long. Okay, just that kind of thing makes the AOP and the OOP different. These are not completely opposite, but AOP is a little bit different from object-oriented programming. Okay, object-oriented programming is very much linear. Okay, but this is not linear. AOP is not linear. It can be applied automatically at any given point. Okay, that's it. How AOP differs from OOP? This all will be asked in the reviews. How do we can differentiate AOP and OOP? Okay, can you tell to the video? You not able to do that after 3 days. Then how do you able to do that after 3 months? Not sure, but you should do that. Okay. Just up to now we are discussing in a pretty much logical manner. Okay. This is the logical stuff related to emo. This is the theoretical stuff related to emo. Have you understood this? Up to now? Everybody? Okay. Now let's try to correlate this theoretical stuff to the actual code. Okay. Now
let me close all this. So this, see, it is not a, it need not to be a web application. Just I have developed a very standalone application. Okay, a core Java application. Okay, so let me update the build path. If it is a web application, directly we can paste the jar files in the lib. Since it is a core Java application, we are updating the build path. Okay. I think there is a file named string underscore jars.
Yeah. I deleted it.
Huh?
I deleted that.
Deleted that.
It might be available in either Malaysia or tutorial.
No issues. You can make it again. Let me update the build path. Okay. No. But it is string and snap, right? Use string and scriptures. Okay, so all the jar files are being uploaded into spring underscore jars. From there, I have updated the build path. Okay, once build path is available, then all this can be applied. Let me develop a simple class. Person. So, let me develop the package. Okay, let's consider like the person has id, no, person is having id and name. Now let me write some data sensitive. Okay, I have written some data sensitives. Now, how in general
The business also many application has these three answers already. Okay, we have UI, UI presents HTML, CSS, measures, all the stuff. UI type will be interacting with the web data. Okay, you have to implement this web data. We have Spring MVC. Okay, in Spring MVC will be used to implement this web data. Okay, the web data will be used in the transaction controller, any controller used in the web data. From the web data, we interact with the service data or service data. In the service data, we actually run the business flow. Okay, and from the service data, we inject the DO data. Okay, in the DO data, we actually generate the database. Okay, now from the web data, we interact with service, from service data, we interact with DO. Okay, and let's say that in the service data, the business flow. Okay. In general, most of the scenarios, we will apply the AOC concepts on the service. Okay? Just because the service itself will decide which course to be executed, which course to not be executed, okay? Which include will be executed, difference or whatever the concept. All the business logic will decide the service. Wherever the business logic is there, obviously the logic also will be there. Exception handling will be there, caching will be there. Yes, the web data will just transfer the information to the UI to the service. The actual business logic will be there in the service lines. So, mainly the AOC will be concentrated on the service. Okay? And the service data is a target for 99% of the AOC. So 99% of the AOC is proxies. The target will be the service data. Okay? Target also will be from the service data, we are injecting the DO. So, since we are maintaining the person information, let me consider the person service and person DO. Okay?
now let me add a class person service. Okay, Okay. Now let's have another class. In general, we modify the package. Remove dot. Sorry. Each and every tile should be there in a specific package. Okay. All the model objects should be there in the model package. Like this, we segregate the classes into a specific package. Okay, then only it will be correct. See, the model object is there in the HU Spring AOP demo dot model package. Okay, and service will be there in the service package. So person should be imported just because it is there in different package. Okay, and now let me give another package. Okay, in the DO package, let me write a class person DO. Okay, the person DO contains a method add person. Okay, which actually interacts with the database and add the person. It might be through JDBC, it might be through Hibernate, or it might be through MyBadges, whatever way it might be. Okay, this person object information will be saved in the database. The person or information will be stored in the database through the DO. Okay. Person DO. In the person DO, we are there in the add person. From here, we will write in general what DO means. The DO will extend to Hibernate DO support. Okay, and the DO will have a data source, and through the Hibernate template we save the person information, which is Hibernate. With JDBC, what happens? We extend to JDBC DO support, okay, and we get the template object and we form the query. Okay, anyhow, we are saving the information from the DO to database. But now we are not concentrating on that, we are concentrating on the AOP. Okay, now from the person service, okay, what we do is we inject a person DO. Okay, now let me have private person DO. Let me write status and status. Now, am I creating the object to person DO in the person service? Am I creating the object in person to person DO in person service? Am I creating the object to person DO in the person service? No, we are injecting. We should inject that through Spring dependency injection. So first, let me try to configure this person service in the Spring. Okay, we can configure in any file. Let me go for new others XML file whose name is spring-aop.xml. The name can be anything, just I am giving spring-aop.xml. Okay. Now let me copy the grammar. Hello.xml. The beans tag is a root tag. The bin tag is a child tag. The bin tag has ID and name. ID equal to and class equal to, what's the class? I'm configuring the service, okay, in the XML file, okay, and I'll try to inject, what's the class name? Person service, okay, and I'll try to inject the dependencies through setter injection, okay. Property, what's the name of the property in the person service? Person DO, okay, and ref equal to person DO. Now, do I have a reference object person DO? Do I have a reference object person DO in this XML file? No. Let me create the reference object. Right now in the XML file I don't have any person DO reference. So let me create a bin. Person DO class equal to, what's the class that we have? Found out something. Okay. Now I have injected the DO into the service. Now, how I can, let me write another class. Spring AOP manager. Okay. Just consider like if we have a main method. I'm just trying to develop a very standalone application, not a internet application, very core Java application which makes use of AOP concepts. Okay. Now, if I want to create an object in a core Java application, how we can create? Through Spring. Through Spring, if I want to create an object in a core Java application, a normal standalone application, how can we create an object? By making use of either bin factory or application context. If we want to create an object, we should make use of either bin factory or application context. The better way is application context. Okay, what's the file name? Hello.xml. No, it's not hello.xml. It's Spring. So it would be better to copy the file name. AOP.xml. Okay. Now, person service equal to what's the, let me close this. What's the ID name? Person service. Okay. Now from the service, I'll make a call to the PO. person service dot add person. So in the service, what I am doing? Just I am creating a person object and trying to add the person. Okay. Now in the DO service class, what I will do? Just I'll create the person, add the person only. I'll not interact with the database in the service class. Just I'll interact with the service in the DO. Okay. In the DO, I am trying to just add the person. This is a rough example. It's not actual. It's a very rough example. Okay, but our intention is to discuss the AOP related stuff. Okay. Now we have model object, we have a service, okay, we have a DO, we have a Spring configuration file, and we have the client application. Okay. Now just if I execute this, okay. Now first let me keep some system or other vigilance. After the call. Okay. No. Okay, this is the basic method, and from the service I am making a call to the DO. Okay. Now in the Spring configuration file, I have written a service and I have written a DO. Now we need to write an advice, right? We need to write an advice, okay, which is called whenever the service method is executed. We need to write advice which is called whenever a service method is executed. Okay. Now let me try to write a simple advice. Okay. And regarding advices, we have 4 different types of advices. We have 4 different types of advices in AOP. First, we'll discuss in depth about the advices, when the advices will be called, and we'll see how the advices will be executed. We have 4 different types of advices. One is before advice, after advice, throws advice, around advice. These are the 4 different advices, 4 different types of advices that are available in AOP. In Spring AOP. In Spring AOP we have 4 different types of advices. Before advice, after advice, throws advice, around advice. Okay. Before advice means this advice will be invoked before the method call. Just name tells that before advice means this advice will be invoked before the method call. After means this advice will be invoked after returning from the method call. After means after the completion of the method call. Throws means okay. this advice will be executed whenever an exception is raised. Let's consider like when we call service from DO, DO from service, and if there is any exception raised, then automatically this throws advice will be executed. Around advice. This around advice is a combo of or combination of the above three advices. Around the advice is a combination of around three advice, above three advices. Around advice can be used to track a method before calling it or after calling it, or even when the exception arises in the method. Just around is a combo of about three. In general, we use advices more specifically rather than generic like around. We use advices more specifically. See, if around makes the work of all advices, why we should go for other advices means we should use the advices more specifically. See, let's consider like if I have this around advice, we can go for before, after as well as through. But if my intention is only to handle after, why I should go for before and throws? See, my intention is to call this aspect, to execute this aspect, or to execute this advice only after returning from a method. My intention is that. Okay? But if I use around, what happens? Advice will be executed before executing the method, as well as when an exception is raised, as well as after executing the method. Is it required for us? No. So, we execute aspects or advices very specifically. If you want before, we go for before. If you want after, we go for after. If you want to execute advice when exception is raised, when we go for throws advice. If you want to do all the things, then only we go for around. Understood? We go for the advices very specifically. Okay? If you want to execute an advice before a method call, then we go for before advice. If you want to execute the advice after a method call, then we go for after. Then if you want to execute advice when an exception is raised, then we go for throws. If you want to do all those things, then only we go for around. Okay? Some of the interviewers will be asking, the around does all the things, why I should go for this? Why I should go for before or after? Just because unnecessarily the advice will be called, even it was not intended. The intention of the advice was only to execute after returning from a method call. But if you go for around means, even it was not intentional, even before and even exception when the exception is raised, the advice will be executed. Understood? See, our intention is, if our intention is to execute an advice only after a method call, in that case can we use advice? Sorry, can we use around advice? Our intention is to execute the aspect or to execute the advice after a method call, after returning from a method. Then is it advisable to keep around or another advice? Which advice can we use for that purpose? After advice. Why can't we go for around advice? What is the drawback of going with around advice in this case? Okay, unnecessarily before or even while handling the exception, this advice will be executed. Unnecessarily it is a method, it is a burden. Right? See, if you want to go for before as well as if you want to handle or if you want to execute the advice, before a method call as well as when the exception is raised, then which one we go? If you want to execute an advice
before a method call as well as when exception is raised. Which one we prefer? Our own advice. Just because rather than using two different advices, what we do? We use a single advice around. Okay? Like that it will be. Like that, based on the preference, based on the requirement, we prefer to specific advices. It's not that around advice is not at all used or around advice is best. Around advice has a specific requirement. When this combo is required, let's say before after throws or before throws, like the combo kind of thing is required, then we go for around advice. Okay? Understood? The around advice will track the method from the very beginning to the very end. At any point of time, we can track the method using around advice. Okay? Understood what are the different types of advice? Before advice is used to execute the aspect before the method call. After means after returning from the method call. Okay? And throws means when the exception is raised. Around means at any point of the above advices. Okay? Let me write a very simple advice. Okay? Which is a before advice. Let me write another package. Person before advice. I'm writing this in AOP.demo.advice package. So just I'm granularing the things based on the specific package. I'm not writing all the things in the same package. It's just I'm dividing the things into specific packages as per the requirement. Okay? Okay? The before advice. Okay? Any before advice class. Okay? Should implement with an interface named method before advice. Method before advice is interface in AOP package. Okay? Method before advice is the interface in AOP package or .spring framework .aop package. In order to implement the before advice. In order to implement the before advice. Not implement the before advice. We should have a method before advice in the place. Which has an implemented method before. Okay, let me execute some now. Just inside here we can write any logic. See, here we can write any cross-cutting logic. We can write transaction management, or we can write logging, or we can write authorization. Let's consider like before. In general, if you think
Before starting some process, what we do? Before starting some process, we do authorization, right? Whether this particular person is authorized to execute this method or not. Okay, that is a before advice. Well, that's one of the examples for before advice. Okay, like that. Okay, now even logging also. Okay, just I am going to execute this method. That can be developed as a before advice. Okay, now just I am writing a system.out.println. In general, in real-time applications, there will be a logic. What we need to do before that method? Let's consider like I am opening a file. Then I can open the file in the before advice. So we need not to open the file in every method. Rather than opening the file in every method, we can open the resources in the before advice. So before executing the method, we open the file. After returning from the method, we close the file. Okay? Or we can implement logging, or we can implement authorization, whether this user is authorized to execute this method or not. Okay? We can do anything once the advice method is called. The thing is, we need to learn is how we need to configure these advices, how we can attach these advices to the service. That's a very important thing. Once the advice is called, we can write any logic here. Okay? Whatever the cross-cutting logic it might be logging, okay, it might be transaction management, it can be anything. The very thing that we need to learn is how we can connect these advices to the service or service class. Once the advice is connected to the target or the service object, we can write any logic that we want in the advice methods. Okay? This method has this method object can be used to get any information of the method. We can get the name, we can get all the modifiers. What is the modifier of the method? What is the access modifier? Static or abstract or whatever it might be. What is the default value returned from the method? Just we can automatically invoke the method. We can invoke the method. Is whereas is a method having variable arguments. Like that, we can have any information about the method. What is the return type of the method? What are the parameters of the method? Likewise, once a method control is there with the AOP, we can play around the method. We can do anything with the method. Once let's consider like the service method is the service is the target, and in the service method, in the person service we have add person. And this add person is a joint point. This add person is a joint point for our aspect or advice. In this method, we can apply the aspect at any point of time. Now I am applying the aspect before method. Point cut means where exactly this aspect can be applied. Joint point means the places in the target where an aspect can be applied. The possible places in the target where the aspect can be applied is called as joint point. Where exactly this aspect is going to be applied is called as point cut. By default, Spring AOP will apply the aspects to all the join points. By default, Spring AOP will apply the aspect to all the join points. If you don't want to do so, we define point cuts. By default, Spring AOP will apply the advices or aspects to all the join points. If you don't want to do so, if you want to mention that only at this special point cut you should apply this aspect, then we define the point cuts. First we'll explain some examples without point cuts, and then after we'll explain how point cuts can be applied. Okay? In the first example I'm not discussing about point cuts. Okay? First I'll discuss about how the AOP can be connected. Once AOP is connected means we can do anything, we can play around. Okay? Now, once the method information is there, okay, we can do anything with the method. Okay? We can do anything with the method. Okay? Like, just I'm printing the system.println. I'm printing the system.println. Okay? But I can, in general, this will be done in the login. But I am printing temporarily. I am printing in system.println, but it will be done in the login. Okay? Just what I am doing is, just I'm printing that. I don't know which method is being, on which method or on which point cut on which join point or on which point cut exactly this before his advice is applied. See, while developing this advice, we don't know exactly where this advice is applied. The advice to service configuration will be done in the Spring configuration files. Okay, so just we get the method name. Which method is being, on which method this advice is being applied. Okay, which method is executed now. Okay, now let me go for, now I have written a simple advice, which is a before advice, which has a before method. Okay, which takes the method, the list of arguments. Okay, this is the type is the written values. Okay, okay, and the next thing, how we can configure this advice to the target. What is the target here? What is the target here? Person service. Okay. How we can configure, how we can map this person service target to this person before advice. Okay. Means it is done in the Spring configuration files. Already we have configured the person service. Okay. The only thing that we need to do is, okay, if you see the diagram, what are all the things that we have? Do we have the target? Do we have the advice? Do we have the person DO? What is the thing remaining? Proxy. Okay? Just we'll develop the proxy and we'll configure that whenever this specific person service method is executed, divert the call to the advice. So let me divide a proxy. This is something like Just let me make use of a proxy factory bin. This proxy factory bin acts as a proxy. Okay, this is a class which acts as a proxy object. Okay, now to this proxy, let me append the target. Target ref equal to, what's the target that we have? Person service. Now let me have the address also. Let me configure even the address also. What's the class? What's the package that we have? com.aop.advice package. Okay. Dot. What's the class? Person before advice. See, I have configured the advice class. Okay. Now I have configured the service, DO and advice. Now the property is, I think it is transaction attributes. Let me see exactly. That's the term names. There might be multiple advisors, okay, configured for the same target. For the same target, we may configure multiple attributes, but multiple advisors. But right now I'm targeting only with single advice. What's the advice we have? Personal advice. Okay. Now I'm giving the person advice as a aspect. Okay. To person service through the proxy person proxy. Understood? See, person proxy bin is the proxy. Okay, and the proxy will have a target, okay, and interceptor names, okay, and whenever this person service is used to invoke any method, whenever the person service is used to invoke any method, okay, it will be called through the proxy, and the proxy will have a interceptor names. Interceptor names will give you the list of advices. Interceptor name will give you the list of advices. Now I have only person advice. Let me see here. It is there. See, there are some dependent jar files. Okay, there are some dependent jar files. Okay, just let's hang on here. Okay, as the time is over. So tomorrow I'll assign the task to somebody else, who are there in my room. Okay, to download these jar files. See, it's telling like no class definition found error or dot object web ASM some type. Okay, there are some dependent jar files still required to work with this AOP. So we'll download the jar files and just tomorrow we'll see how this will be executed. But today Sharath will share the example. Okay, just download the example, add the required jar files. Just how you can find the jar files means just copy this, no class definition found error. Copy this. Okay, copy this and just type like jar file in Google. Google is not available, right? Just in Google type this. Okay, copy this and paste this and type find jar. Okay, so it will give you some links to the jar file. Which jar file? So download the jar file and add it in the class file. Add it in the Spring underscore jars and add it in the class file. So like that you may get still some more class of code exceptions. Okay, ultimately you will get some result. Okay, other than class of code exception. Okay, from there we will continue. There are some dependent jar files. Okay, we'll download the jar files and tomorrow we will continue with this example. Okay, yes, Sharat, please share the example. Okay.